$6,000 in hopes that you are not going to detect that and file a currency transaction report. Because that transaction took place in one day, one business day, a CTR would be required regardless of the gap in between the time. Now, if I came to your location at 8 o'clock at night, if you're open, of course, and I transfer $6,000, and then I come back the next day and I transfer another $6,000, a CTR would not be required because it was not in the same business day. But at that time, you would want to file a suspicious activity report because the person appears to be avoiding the currency transaction report, which is illegal. So if there is a pattern that the reason they're sending half one day and then other half the next day, then I would look and file a suspicious activity report form for avoidance of filing that currency transaction report. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, record keeping and verification of ID for money transmissions in excess of $3,000 is a requirement of the Bank Secrecy Act. Now, for money orders, and again, whether you have Vigo branded or you sell your own money orders, the Bank Secrecy Act it requires a cash log, a money order log, to be kept for any sales of $3,000 to $10,000. So anybody purchasing money orders above $3,000 would require that a cash log be filled out. Suspicious activity reporting. Here's how it states. You must report any transaction, attempted transaction, involving at least $2,000, and you know, suspect, or have a reason to suspect the money comes from illegal activity or is intended to conceal illegal activity. Transaction is intended to evade a cash transaction reporting records law, or the transaction makes no business sense or doesn't seem to be for legal purposes. One question I constantly get is, if somebody sends $2,000, then I need to file a suspicious activity report, and that is incorrect. Simply because someone sends $2,000 or more does not require the filing of a suspicious activity report. There must be some other factors that lead you to believe that that transaction is unusual and or suspicious, illegal, something else about the transaction made your stomach turn and you thought to yourself, something's not right. That's when you file an SAR. Or you see someone with a pattern of sending transactions. Should someone come in and they send $2,000 today, they're back in your area tomorrow and they send $2,500, then they're back on Saturday and they send another $2,000, you need to look at that and think to yourself, that's a lot of money in a very short period of time. It's added up and you can see where somebody has now sent $8,000 to $10,000 to $20,000, again in a short period of time. Does that make sense? Is the person operating a business? Are there other things that might lead you to see that they're not illegal? But again, if you don't know and you suspect it to be unusual or you see it as unusual, you should file an SAR. Also, as I mentioned earlier with the movement of drug money, if the person, another question I get, if a person comes in and they only send $400 and then later $500 and the next day $400, well, I didn't file an SAR because they never actually sent $2,000 at any one time. But what I'll do is when I do my analysis, I can show them that within 7 days, that person actually sent $4,500. They sent $8,000. So it has reached that threshold of $2,000. In other words, it is an aggregate. Once the dollar amounts start to get at $2,000 or above, you should, again, take a closer look at those, especially if there's a pattern or the frequency of the transactions is not consistent with normal activity. The Money Laundering Control Act, this is where I remind people that money laundering is a crime in the United States and there are severe penalties. We have here the first code, which prohibits knowingly conducting a transaction with illegal money in order to help conceal the illegal money. or to evade a currency reporting law, or to evade taxes. This can carry a penalty of up to 20 years in jail. Now, this would certainly mean that they can prove in a court of law that the person was involved with the money laundering. They had knowledge of it. They either were receiving payment or working with a criminal organization, or possibly just ignoring and not filing and just kind of helping people to evade currency reporting laws. The next one prohibits knowingly conducting a transaction with illegal money in an amount over $10,000. This could carry a penalty of up to 10 years in jail. Some of you may be familiar with a company by the name of Seagate. In the public documents, what happened with Seagate, this is a company that was investigated in California. They're a money transfer business. What was happening was law enforcement agents were coming into the locations, undercover of course, and trying to see if the agents would help them move money without proper identification. And when they did these things, they were actually breaking the law. So in other words, law enforcement officers would walk in, explain that they needed to send $11,000 of drug money, openly stating it's drug money, but they did not want to show an ID or send the money under their name. Unfortunately for that company, the agents then assisted the law enforcement officers in moving the money without showing ID and helped them, gave them tips, and told them how they can get this money to Mexico without an ID. Now, those agents, of course, are breaking the law. So Seagate was fined and penalized, but at the same time, those agents could literally be charged under the Money Laundering Control Act for helping them to evade those record-keeping requirements. Under the Patriot Act, this is under Section 352, it requires financial institutions, including money service businesses, to have at a minimum these areas here. One, the development of internal policies and procedures. The government said money service businesses such as Vigo cannot write your policies and procedures and tell you, okay, here's what you need to do, exactly how you need to do it, and follow these rules, because they know that each agent operates independently of each other. They have different ways of working. So you are required to build policies and procedures that are your specific AML it's your specific program. What they want to know is basically, how do you file? What are the processes? What are the procedures? They must be in writing, and they will be requested at Title 31 exams. Now, designation of a compliance officer. This is the person responsible for the day-to-day compliance with the policies and procedures. I always say this should be the person that would be speaking with the IRS Title 31 examiners if there's any recommendations or violations that are found. This is the person that has to have that higher level of authority to say, yes, we have an effective program, no, we don't have an effective program, and works on the day-to-day responsibilities to make it work. Now, depending if you have multiple locations and there's a higher level compliance officer, a small network of maybe 5 or 10 locations, I could be the compliance officer at the higher level, but then each location I should have somebody as a designate that is there for the employees at the actual location to answer questions and help kind of keep up with the requirements. An ongoing employee training program, again, this is something that is required. It's not enough to say that you've trained your employees once and then never got back with them. You just kind of left it alone. They want to see proof of ongoing training. That could either be monthly, quarterly, annually. Again, what works for your business? If you do a high volume of transactions or you have employee turnover, it may have to happen more often. Again, depending on how your business is operating, you want to make that work, but you want to document that. And of course, you want to be able to prove that you did the training, and that's always by having people sign off on tests or sign-in sheets. They will want to have proof of that training. Unfortunately, they're not in the habit of just trusting us to tell them, yes, we did it, but we can't prove it. An independent audit function. This basically cannot be the compliance officer. Pretty simple rule there. If I wrote and created the program and I'm the one grading myself on the program I created, I'm going to give myself an A+. It has to be independent of the compliance officer. You do not need to hire an outside resource to do the review, although many organizations do. It just needs to be somebody that is familiar with the requirements, understands what the program should have within it, and they come in and basically do an audit of your program and come in and really document whether, yes, you have written policies and procedures, the compliance officer is designated, proof of training was there. Again, if there's deficiencies, that person should be documenting those deficiencies so that the compliance officer can correct those prior to any Title 31 exams or law enforcement inquiries coming in. Also under the Patriot Act, Section 311, I just mentioned this at times, Treasury may impose special measures against foreign jurisdictions, foreign financial institutions, classes of trade. So again, if they felt that, you know, a country decided not to follow the banking rules and regulations of the U.S. or the world, you know, they can be excluded from obviously having our Vigo services there. And we would notify, of course, and keep them out of the system. Standards of knowledge. The U.S. government will hold MSBs and individual employees to a standard of knowledge with regard to money laundering. First is actual knowledge. Going back to, again, knowing exactly what you're doing, knowing that it's a crime, and continuing to do the transactions. So if somebody came in and told you, as those law enforcement officers did in California for Seagate, they basically come in and tell you, this is the money I've made, it is illegal money, I sell drugs, and I want to use your location to spend my money. Do they offer payment? Because again, money launderers are not short of cash. They may provide you with that cash, and then, you know, you kind of fall into the game. It's actual knowledge. Constructive knowledge, there's enough there that you should have known. You know, maybe you're not a part of the crime, you're not getting paid for it, but you know what's going on, and you continue to let it happen. Willful blindness, this one, ignoring red flags. Where there are prominent red flags that signal criminal activity afoot, a jury may infer that a defendant deliberately ignored facts about what was going on. I'll share an example of a person that I visited in Hidalgo, Texas. This was an agent who had the money transfer services. They were sending a lot of money and picking up a lot of money. When I did the analysis, what I saw was this person was paying out $1.2 million a month. Hidalgo, Texas, you can basically throw a rock and it's going to land in Mexico. When I looked at the patterns, they met what I had described earlier. The money was coming from all over the U.S., but was all being paid out at this one location in Hidalgo, Texas. It seemed as though he had a revolving door with the way people were picking up money. All day, every hour, you know, large cash transactions. The day that I arrived, I had mentioned that I would be there. I was in the office with this gentleman for 4 hours, kind of going through, wondering why he's not filing suspicious activity reports. He had received training in the past. He had a program, and his answer was nothing suspicious was happening at his location. I continued to push and ask the question, why would somebody be receiving $50,000, $70,000, $80,000? This other person's picking up another $50,000, $70,000, $80,000. The money's coming from all over the U.S. And the person looked at me and said, look, they sell used cars. I kind of just stopped. I looked around. I actually read this to him, told him, are you familiar with willful blindness? Do you know that ignoring red flags can get you in some serious trouble? I'm not the FBI agent. You need to correct this. The person was resistant, said nothing was going on. Within the time that I spent there, 3 to 4 hours, not one person came in to pick up money, which kind of helped me understand that he probably told people not to come in that day. We found that they were actually being investigated. I had requested that we suspend their services. We were notified by law enforcement that they were already part of an investigation. Long story short, this person went to court, tried to say the same things to the jury that he told me, that he didn't know what was going on, everything was okay. There was enough evidence there to show that he ignored these prominent red flags, and the person went to prison. Now, he obviously was convicted of a few other things, but when it came to this part, he was not able to get out of it by saying he didn't know what was going on. There was just too much evidence there to prove otherwise. Record keeping and customer identification requirements. Again, I'll just ask if there's any questions for that particular section that I might be able to answer for anyone.
Yep, Valdez, we actually have one question.
Okay.
Does the Vigo web form recognize and prompt you if a CTR is necessary when a combination of transactions are made during the same day?
I do not believe there's a prompt that would say the person was in earlier. I could be wrong. I know that there's some different system controls with that. Pat, may I kind of defer to you on that one to see if it does aggregate and tell somebody that this person was in there earlier?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
I mean, we do back-end review of those types of things at Western Union, but we don't see anything on the front end.
Okay. I would say that, if the person is using different operators or they kind of slip through the cracks, that's why a good monitoring of the day activity to try to see if the person was there 2 or 3 times. You may or may not catch that, but they're usually pretty crafty. They'll try to come in and do one in the morning and then come back later when there's another employee there. But again, hopefully, somebody with the monitoring or looking over that day-to-day transaction, somebody might catch that. All right, we'll go through the record keeping and customer ID requirements. For money transfer of $3,000 or more, unless you're in Arizona or Oklahoma, $1,000 or more. And then when somebody is sending to Ecuador, the rules kick in at $2,000. But the following information is what's required: the name of the person, their address, ID type, number and state, country of issuance, a Social Security number for all U.S. citizens. If no Social Security number, then record a passport number or an alien ID number. The one thing that I know is someone that's legally working in the U.S. with an alien ID number, they are issued a working Social Security number, so they should have both of those. The one thing that we cannot accept is somebody with a foreign ID. An example, I maybe come in with an ID that's from another country, and then as a secondary ID, I give you a U.S. Social Security number. It just kind of doesn't really make sense how someone would be able to, if they have a U.S. Social Security number, then they should have some type of U.S. ID. So we really try to keep that clean in the system. The date of birth of a person, and then the occupation. So, these are things that we look for and try to better understand. And so as the person sending these larger dollar amounts, this is where they have to show these IDs, and this is where they might turn around and run once they know that they have to show an ID. At $7,500 or more, additional information is required, so an interview will take place with a Vigo representative. Again, what we're trying to do is better understand the reasons for the large dollar transactions. At that time, if it's realized that the person is sending more than $10,000 in cash, then the CTR would be required as well. Transaction receipts, you should keep those filed in a chronological order for your monitoring processes, just to help you kind of keep up with who's coming in and what types of transactions they're doing. Receipts and information, pretty much everything under the Bank Secrecy Act is required to be kept for 5 years. I know here Vigo has added information to the agent's portion of the receipt to help agents fulfill their BSA requirements. The receipt automatically prints the information of the ID on the consumer. So, this is where if somebody's reviewing those receipts at the end of the day, they'll see these people that are sending large dollar transactions and breaking them up even on a day-to-day type basis. What types of IDs are acceptable? It's always kind of, this is a difficult subject. I know a lot of times, with the multiple IDs that are issued out there, what are we looking for? Really, we're looking for a government-issued ID. Somebody coming in with their employee ID badge, we would not accept that, of course. Somebody coming in with a student ID from their college or university, even if it's a state college, it's not a state-issued ID. It's something that's issued by a university or a school. So what we're looking for is a state identification, a driver's license. I know you may or may not accept the matricular card, but again, that's a government-issued ID, passports, these types of identifications. It must be current and not expired. I guess this is difficult because then I'll get calls at times and someone will tell me, well, they've got an ID, but it has no expiration date. Well, my thought then is that ID does not expire. Most driver's license state IDs are issued for either a 4 to 8 year period. If I came in and I show my driver's license and it expired 3 days ago, that is no longer a valid ID. You cannot accept that identification. Must have a photograph of the customer. Again, a photo ID showing that, yes, the person standing in front of you is who they say they are. And it should have their street address is what we want to capture in the system. Most IDs will have their address, but again, they may not. Person may be moving around. It could be their passport. If they offer a P.O. box, just again, dig a little deeper and try to find out where they actually reside. Again, this is kind of repetitive, but wanted to list a few of them: driver's licenses, state-issued IDs, passport, alien ID, the matricular card. Again, if any of you have your own policies behind not accepting that, we certainly respect that and you have that right. The Instituto Federal Electoral Card, this is a Mexican voter registration card, does have a photograph of the person. It is issued by the government of Mexico. When recording photo ID information, you want to capture the ID type, the number, and the issuer. And some of the IDs, as I mentioned, we do not accept credit cards, even though some credit cards have the picture of the person on the credit card. That is not an ID. Library cards, Social Security cards are not an acceptable form of primary ID. Again, it does not have my picture. It certainly is something that can be entered as a secondary ID, but you still have to have something that shows the photograph of the person, who they are. I know that a lot of other questions I get, does the person have to physically show you their Social Security card number? And they do not. Most people do not carry their Social Security card with them any longer, so you would obviously, they don't have to show it to you. Then that prompts the question, well, how do I know if they're actually giving me a real Social Security number? Well, I always say the obvious needs to be refused, where somebody says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. At that time, an employee should know through proper training that that is not acceptable. It's not a valid Social Security number, and we're not going to continue this transaction for you. And at that point, I may ask them to show me a Social Security card that gives me the real number, because they may come back and say, okay, well, it's 523-12-2950, which sounds legitimate now, but again, because they're playing games or lying, I would probably not continue with that transaction. I have seen these when I do my analysis and visit locations, and what I try to remind people is you, the employee, are helping that person to break the law when you enter all 1s, all 2s, or 1 through 9 as their Social Security number. I always say that if you can handle the ID, yes.
Hey, Valdez, just as an aside on that, We have data integrity rules that are in the system in place now that prevent that person from being able to put in ones, numerical sequences and things of that nature. And those are being enhanced all the time by our data integrity group in compliance. So,
no, I'm glad to hear that, Pat. That sounds good because maybe I won't see them anymore. As I was saying here on this slide, handle IDs whenever possible. The thing, when you actually hold it in your hand, you can get a better idea of whether this is a fake ID or is it a piece of paper that they're handing you that certainly is not real. Review that expiration date, make sure it's still valid. Look at other data as well. I think a lot of times, people make fake IDs, or maybe they've gotten a hold of someone else's ID, and people don't look close enough. But if you look at the person, you may realize that the person standing in front of you isn't even the person in the picture. Look for approximate age. I may have a fake ID that says I'm 21 years old, and if we were doing this training in person, you would quickly note that I'm not 21 years old anymore, so you can get an idea right there that, okay, this person has a fake ID. Is it the right sex? Does the ID say it should be a female and it's a male in front of you? Color of eyes, I always used to kind of use this, but people use those color contacts anymore. But all I'm saying is when you look at the ID, take the extra moment just to ensure that a lot of the things that it says match up to the person that's standing in front of you. The date of birth, the order of the name. A lot of times with the Hispanic individuals, it's very common not to use just one last name. They have a paternal and a maternal name that they use. Sometimes what I see here is somebody that's trying to hide the movement of their cash. They may use their first name and then the paternal name, and then later come back and use the first name and the maternal name. And again, if you're seeing this type of pattern, I would probably enter all names or just try to recognize why are you switching your names around. Laminated IDs are easily forged. What I used to see a lot of in even a previous job that I had, I would see fake IDs, especially the alien ID cards when they were laminate. They could actually open up one side of those, slide another picture in on top of the actual picture that was there, and then take an iron and kind of heat it back up. And, if you hold the ID, you'll feel the lump in the picture and know that somebody altered that and faked it. So a lot of states have gotten away from the laminated IDs. It's been a long time since I've seen one. Most are now plastic, so the picture is actually embedded into the plastic. Of course, those are a little bit better. Holograms are also used on a lot of the government-issued IDs for the alien ID. And when you kind of put it at those angles, you may see where the hologram stops at the picture of the person and continues on the other side of them. Maybe, again, they were able to alter that picture somehow. But look for those types of things. And my favorite, be suspicious if the customer uses multiple IDs. I've gotten an actual question from locations at times, well, this person comes in and they have ID, but they have a couple of them. So one day they're coming in and they're Bob Smith, the next day they're coming in and they're John Rogers or whatever the case might be. Is that okay? Well, certainly not. It would be illegal to have two different identities, a couple multiple IDs. I would refuse those transactions, or at a minimum file a suspicious activity report form giving all of the information on both IDs to law enforcement officers to let them know what's going on. Suspicious activity, what should you do? You should be aware of the limits and reporting rules. Again, employees that are out there handling these transactions, they should know when ID is required, what amounts people might be trying to send to avoid that. You pay attention to the behavior of the customer in your location. Be aware. I mean, the behavior is huge. People are nervous. People are changing their stories. You do have the right to ask basic questions in regards to their transactions. What is the purpose of the funds? We see that you're here every day sending large dollar transactions. I always say if the person tells you it's none of your business, well, pretty much seems like they're hiding something, and certainly something I would file a suspicious activity report form on. You should watch for unusual or different transactions. You may have a normal customer who comes in and they maybe send a little bit of money home once a month, and then pretty soon now they have a pattern of sending money every day or every other day. What changed? What's going on there? Again, ask those questions. Get a little bit, get to know the customer a little better. Guard against illegal activity. Know your responsibility. Do not backdate forms. If you find that you need to file a suspicious activity report form, you have 30 days to file that suspicious activity report form from the date that you become aware of the activity. So if I saw something that occurred in August today for whatever reason, I would indicate in the narrative that the reason I'm filing today was because I did monitoring. I would not put that I filed this back in August and try to hide that. Collect data and do not tip off customers of your suspicions. Certainly don't want to tell the person that you know you suspect them and that you think they're a drug dealer or a money launderer. Refuse a transaction if you observe structuring or obvious behavioral clues. Again, somebody walks in and they tell you they've got $11,000 of drug money. They want to transfer that money, but they don't have an ID. I would refuse that transaction, get them out of your location, and not conduct that transaction. I say 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a law enforcement officer or somebody doing some type of mystery shopping to test to see if you and or your employees will help facilitate the movement of that illegal cash. Again, any questions kind of through what we covered there? I know IDs usually prompt quite a few questions.
Valdez, actually, we do have a few questions. The first one is, are the credit unions responsible for checking for activity for the sender before performing a transaction?
Checking the activity, you mean their prior activity?
Right.
Well, again, you know, I think you should have a monitoring process in place, whether you're reviewing your transactions on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. You know, at the point of sale, you may not catch it. I think that, you know, I come in and I use one employee on Monday, and then Tuesday I'm using another employee. The second person might not know or have any way of knowing that I was there the day before, but somebody that's reviewing the records for, the day or the week would see that, wow, this name is consistently here. So it's through that monitoring process that you're required to look for those types of patterns.
I think the question would be, should you do the transaction and file a suspicious activity?
The follow-up question would be, I'm sorry, Greg?
I think maybe that question can do with performing the transaction and filing a suspicious activity as opposed to refusing to do the transaction.
Right. One option is, instead of refusing to do the transaction, could the credit union just file a suspicious activity report?
Again, if you have suspicion of activity, then of course, you know, doing the transaction and then filing the SAR, because I don't know for a fact that this person is doing something illegal, but it certainly appears to be unusual or suspicious. So I did the transaction, and then I filed an SAR. The IRS is going to understand that. What they are not going to really want to hear is that, well, yeah, the person came in and said they were sending $11,000 of their drug money, and I helped them break it up, but then I did file an SAR. Because once you have knowledge that the transaction is illegal, you need to refuse that transaction and get them out of your location. So again, actual knowledge, or again, I just strongly suspect that this is something's going on. You know, there's two different stories there.
Okay. Another question: as a form of ID, is a government employee photo ID acceptable?
A government-issued ID, a government employee, as an example, possibly someone from the military, someone that has if you can see that it's issued by the federal government, you know, again, a military ID would be acceptable. So that's the first one that stands out to me. A state-issued ID is, you know, for a state employee, it's still really an employee ID. And kind of, again, with the different IDs that are out there, just make sure that it's not an employee ID. If it's a military ID, certainly those are acceptable.
Okay, another question is, can you address the ITIN number? If someone comes in and they don't have a Social Security number, what other identification documents do they need to present if they have an ITIN number?
I do not believe we accept the ITIN. Pat, can you maybe help me out on that one? I know there was a discussion.
We aren't officially accepting the ITIN number. I mean, we prefer to have the Social Security number, but if the situation arises where that's all that's available, we will take it, but it's an exception to the rule.
Okay, and you know, if the person has a passport, they can use the passport as the primary and the secondary ID. So if somebody, you know, didn't have a social or all they had was an ITIN, maybe ask if they have a passport. If they do, then of course you can use that for both.
Okay, we have a few questions, so we're actually going to address a few more. We have also a follow-up question that is from the web form. This credit union was under the impression that Vigo would notify them if they recognize a total dollar amount from a combination of transactions throughout the day. How would you know if the individual went to multiple outlets to perform their transactions, and how would a CTR be acquired for this
Yeah, we are, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, if this was recognized after the fact.
Yeah, one thing that remember, you're held accountable to the transactions that are taking place at your location. Now, if someone uses a credit union A, for example, and then goes to credit union B, which has, those two credit unions don't have a way of communicating with each other, they don't monitor each other's transactions, you are only responsible for the transaction that took place at your location. Vigo would be looked at a higher level, and we do have analysts that look for those types of patterns where somebody uses credit union A, credit union B, credit union C all in one day. So we, as the parent MSB, are asked to look for those types of patterns and those types of transactions. If somebody from Vigo contacted you and said, hey, we've recognized this person did 2 or 3 transactions today, not at your location, we would like to see if you can get their IDs, then, you know, I would follow the direction from that operator. But again, we look to try to catch those types of activities. And you, again, are responsible for what's happening at your location.
Continue with some more questions.
Sure.
If the credit union is aware of an illegal activity, they're wanting to know if they could perhaps try to detain the person or actually call the police.
You know, it kind of, you know, what is your policies and procedures? I think that's certainly a good thing to discuss. Your AML compliance officer should be the one to make those types of decisions. I personally probably would not want to try to detain someone in my location. You can reach out to local law enforcement groups. I know that many organizations already have those types of relationships with local law enforcement officers, either for loss prevention or other issues that may be going on. So, you know, certainly taking that extra step to call your local law enforcement group and explain to them, yes, we believe this person is coming in and this is illegal activity, you know, I think is a good step. But you would want to make sure to have a good process in place, make sure the right people know what's going on and who's communicating and talking to law enforcement. I think that when the person is standing there in front of you, I get a lot of safety reasons to not try to say, okay, we know you're doing something and you're not going anywhere until the police get here. Could cause a pretty bad situation. But know that, yes, you can reach out to law enforcement outside of just filing an SAR.
Okay, I know you had mentioned and you had addressed that credit unions should be responsible for their branch and whatever transactions take place at their location, but what about credit unions that have various branches and don't always or can't always communicate in real time?
again, it comes in and your policies and procedures kind of dictate how things are handled. If I had a network of 5 or 10 locations and I have the ability at a higher level to view what's happening at all of those locations, and I have a tool to see if somebody's using my location, then, you know, the IRS or someone may say, well, you had knowledge that these people were moving around your network, and you should have been filing on that. If I don't have the proper tools to do that, then the direction is the responsibility, again, at each one of your locations. And when somebody should still be reviewing SARs at a higher level. So, you know, I work with a lot of national accounts. Some have 1,500 locations, some have 200 locations, and I have some that do it both ways. No, the responsibility is at the store level, or they have the ability to review all of their locations from a higher level. So whatever tools you have in place, you got to better understand where you're at to do that. So if I have 10 locations and I say I want all SARs to come through me at a corporate office, and then I'll forward those to the IRS, and I recognize that, you know, this location's seeing the same thing another location is seeing, I'll probably put that information into one SAR now and make a more comprehensive SAR for law enforcement and the IRS because I was able to detect it.
Okay. Would you recommend the credit unions to make a copy of the ID for a customer that's picking up the funds?
I know many locations do that. I think that, you know, it's secure private information. If you're going to do that, make sure that you have the proper storage of that information or a proper way to keep that information private. I mean, you kind of get into different laws, the privacy laws, for having that person's identity, because the driver's license will have their address. Some driver's licenses actually have their social security numbers. So if you're going to do it, I just strongly encourage that you follow through on the storage and keeping of those documents.
Yeah, I think what's important to know is there aren't any AML requirements that require you to take a copy of that ID until it reaches that $7,500 threshold level, where the people who are conducting the interview with the consumer, they'll ask for copies of the IDs. But prior to that, all we're asking is that you review the IDs and make sure that they aren't forged, like Valdis was saying earlier, and that the person in front of you is that person. But there are a lot of privacy issues, and certainly, you know, credit unions and banks, you know, you guys have different issues relative to copying IDs for banking purposes, but for the purpose of the money transmission, it's a real risky area to be maintaining those IDs should they get lost because of privacy issues.
We also need a clarification. Is it the credit union's responsibility or Vigo to file the SAR if there's tracking revealed that there's layering using different locations?
Yeah, again, Vigo would file an SAR if somebody is using locations that are independent of each other. There's no way you would know that this person did these other transactions. So to that point, yes, we're responsible for that, to try to capture and identify those types of transactions. Because I could come to your location and send $2,000, and there's nothing unusual or suspicious about that, but you don't know that I was just at 4 other locations doing the same thing. So in that case, your store, there's no way the IRS could come to you and tell you, well, look, this person was running around the neighborhood doing all these transactions, and you had no way of knowing it. So obviously they're not going to be able to hold you accountable for that. They're going to look to see how many transactions did they do at your location, and was there a pattern or was there something here that you should have detected, and that's what they're always looking for.
Okay, those were the questions that we had so far. And also, we also wanted to share with you that our attendees are wanting to say that you both are doing a very good job.
Thank you, appreciate that. I think that the questions that are coming across are are great. I think that having the discussions at times, to me, are better than just reading through the slides. A couple things I'll mention that I didn't really say in the past going through the SAR stuff. One, please know or make sure employees know that it is illegal to tip off or notify someone that an SAR is being filed on them. You know, just because the person continuously comes back, you would never want to tell that person, hey, we filed a suspicious activity report form on you already. The government's coming to get you. It sounds like no one would ever do that, but trust me, I have had it happen in the past. It's illegal. This is a program that's on a need-to-know basis only. Whoever's, you know, filing the SARs, that information stays behind closed doors. You have 30 days to file that SAR, as I mentioned. You have 15 days to file a currency transaction report. So I just wanted to cover those timelines, and everything is kept for that 5-year period. Not sure if we have any. Yes, go ahead, Pat.
I was just going to say, you know, staying on the SAR path here. Also know that on the back end, like Valdis was saying, how we file the SARs, we file it on. We see the consumer who goes to a Vigo agent and sends some money, and then goes to a Western Union agent and sends money, because they're all put into the same system. So as long as we're looking at the same Social Security number or ID number or things of that nature, that will compare that consumer to a Vigo and a Western Union agent, and we'll file. I don't know if the correct word's cross-brand SAR, but we'll file a SAR based on all their activity, not just their activity at Vigo. So if they're trying to structure between going to a Vigo agent here and then going across the street to a Western Union agent over there, or maybe to the other brand, Orlandi Valuta, down the block, I mean, we'll see that and we'll file a SAR on that. It's just not all Vigo activity that we're looking at.
All right. I'm glad you brought that up, Pat. It reminds me of one other thing that I'd like to cover with you. Once you've filed the initial SAR on a person, and then the person continues to do transactions, or you continue to monitor their transactions, you're not required to file an SAR every single time they do a transaction. What you can do is kind of wait for the end of the week, or even give it a little more time, and file one comprehensive SAR with all of the activity. What you're doing is you're giving law enforcement a bigger and better picture of what's going on. Again, file the initial SAR, and then you would want to notify them and check mark that this is a recurring SAR, somebody that you're following up on. And what it does is, as opposed to you see the person come in and you think to yourself, I got to file an SAR every time they come in. Well, that's kind of too much paperwork, and it doesn't really paint a good picture, because you're sending an SAR for 2,000, one for 1,000, one for 2,000. But if you waited for a 1-week period, or even up to 30 days, you can now total that dollar amount, file one comprehensive SAR, and that's going to get the attention of law enforcement officers, because they're going to see a larger dollar amount. You're going to be able to see that somebody just sent $20,000 in a 1-month period, as opposed to 15 or 10 SARs on small dollar amounts. It is inside of the provisions. Just wanted to mention that, because I know sometimes people ask me that question. Every time they come in, do I have to file that SAR? You file the initial one, and then you can track their activity and build one comprehensive SAR. Not sure if anyone is in New York, but wanted to mention New York Part 300. This is an letter that goes out to our agents in New York. And we just want to make sure that agents in that area adhere to filing requirements under the Part 300. It's really not something that we do, but if there's embezzlement, misapplication, larceny, forgery, fraud, dishonesty, any of these things listed here, you need to notify the state of New York. The thing is here, the agents must send a letter to the Vigo Compliance Department describing the relevant facts and circumstances surrounding the reportable activity, the offender's name, their address, their position, details of the events, and estimate of financial loss, if any, and whether the event was reported to law enforcement or the agent's insurance company. There is no form to fill out. Again, if you're in New York and you need additional information on this, you can certainly go through all me to get back to me on this to better understand it. So I wanted to at least mention that in New York, that's something that you should be familiar with. Again, Through this part, I'm not really going to spend a lot of detail. Hopefully everyone here has already put together an AML program, or have started to put together a program, or if you see something here that you might want to add, we'll go through this real briefly. But again, I'm not going to really walk through each one. We mentioned earlier under the Patriot Act, you have to have a designated compliance officer, make sure that's in writing, that you have written policies and procedures. And you want to include monitoring. What are your monitoring procedures? Do you review all of the receipts on a daily basis? Do you review them on a weekly basis? How do you do it? You want to describe in the policies and procedures how you are reviewing those transactions to look for patterns of people spending money. Put your training program in there, and again, your independent review program, how that's going to be conducted. Basically here, a designated compliance officer, they're responsible for implementing and overseeing the program. They should be the ones that create or work with the people to create the policies and procedures. This person should also be involved with any updates or changes to state or federal regulations, policies or procedures either from Vigo or even internal. A lot of times what happens is the IRS comes in and they say, well, your policies and procedures say you're monitoring on a daily basis, but in actuality, you're only monitoring every week. Well, if you made a change, make sure you change the verbiage and documentation in your policies and procedures so that it matches up, because the IRS will hold you accountable to what's written in there. Training, a person should know how often that's occurring, and then making sure that the CTRs and SARs are filled out correctly and completely. When you fill out an SAR form incorrectly and you're sending these in, what you're doing is you're now putting a red flag on your location to possibly get audited because the SARs are not being filled out correctly or CTRs are not being kept correctly. So make sure somebody has a review, or there is a review process before they go to the IRS. As I mentioned, you have 15 days for CTRs, 30 days for SARs. How long are you keeping your documents? Where are you keeping those documents? Can you retrieve those documents? Because they're required to be kept for 5 years, again, the IRS may come in and say, we'd like to see your CTRs from 2007. So are you able to get to those documents, and your policies and procedures should show where those are kept and how to get to them. Initial training, of course, any new employees handling either money orders or money transfers, should go through a training process. You should document that either through a training log or signing a signed document. Some suggestions for performing training. We do send out some materials from time to time, having people read through those, sign off on our quiz, file those, store those for 5 years to prove to somebody that the people that work there have been trained. Even if an employee were to leave, you still want to keep their training records on file to show that while they worked for you, they had received training. Monitoring. Ensure employees are completing SARs, CTRs when necessary. That's what that monitoring process is all about. Ensure ID requirements are being met. We suggest that, daily transaction records be looked at. If again, you can compile those for a weekly basis and then review those. What works best for you? It's really up to you, whether you need to do it daily, weekly, or maybe even monthly if you really are not doing a high volume of transfers, but just make sure that it's manageable and that it's being followed through on. The annual compliance review, again, must be performed at least once a year. We strongly recommend that. The law actually states periodically. It doesn't actually state that it has to be done every 2 months, 3 months, or annually. We strongly encourage annually because changes happen. Things are, going on. Maybe this person identifies that you changed the policy, but you never changed the writing and the procedures, so you need to do that before the IRS comes out. And again, they should be objective. They should obviously be knowledgeable about the Bank Secrecy Act. You don't want to have somebody just sign off a checklist and they don't really know what they're checking. Said it before, compliance officer cannot serve as the reviewer. And again, we do have an annual compliance review checklist that we can provide if needed. So again, if you don't have one of those, you can get those through us as well. When you put the policies and procedures together, it's really the who, what, where, and how of your program. Who's the compliance officer? What are their responsibilities? Is there a designate? Again, if you have 10 locations, and I'm the compliance officer, but at each location, this person is a designate. You should document that as well, and go through, those thresholds. Keep and transfer record requirements. Who's responsible for those records? What needs to be recorded? Currency transaction reporting. Same thing here. Just you're getting the idea. Like I said, I didn't want to really spend a lot of time. You guys aren't new to this part of having everything, but when you go through it, be very descriptive of who has the proper responsibilities. For suspicious activity reporting, the strongest one I can really say is somebody needs to review that. I've said it a couple of times. When I go out and visit locations or even some corporate offices, I'm surprised to see that the SAR doesn't have a narrative. There are 3 pages to a suspicious activity report form. All 3 pages are required to be completed and submitted. The narrative really needs to be the who, what, where, and why you're filing an SAR. I will read a narrative and it will simply state, person transferred $2,000. Again, that's not suspicious. You're not telling law enforcement anything. You want to be descriptive. You want to explain to them why you're filing that SAR. There's certain things that need to be followed, so you should certainly ensure that you have a review process before it goes off to the IRS. Same with monitoring. Again, how often and who's doing it. Employee training. We've covered a lot of this already. Document retention is big. Keep in mind, they will ask for those records. We will provide electronic records of transactions. But again, any of the CTRs and SARs are your responsibility to keep. Who's going to be responsible for coordinating compliance reviews with the IRS? The IRS Title 31 examiners would send a letter directly to your location stating that they're coming out to do an exam. So there needs to be a procedure for that store to notify their compliance officer so that the proper paperwork can get to us here at Vigo and we can help you get prepared for that. So, make sure that you have that advanced procedure to get prepared for this. Usually they give you 3 to 4 weeks notice that they're coming. So that's plenty of time to get the proper paperwork, get the employees, talk about some of the structuring, talk about SARs, talk about things that you believe they're going to be asking questions about. Geographic targeting orders. Basically, a geographic targeting order may be imposed by the state or federal government. At times, they may impose special requirements in a specific location. It could deal with an investigation. Something like this would be communicated to us. We would communicate it to you. An example of that may be that in a specific zip code, they're doing some investigating, so they want to collect ID at $1. Not all Vigo locations across the U.S. would be affected, but the locations within that zip code would need to now get ID at $1. Of course, we wouldn't just blindside you with this. If we knew it was coming or we had to make any changes, we would alter our systems and work with you for the required time period of the order. Registration requirements. Each money service business must register with the Department of Treasury. If you only offer as a money service business our Vigo services, then you are not required to register. We are the parent MSB, so our registration covers the services for Vigo. But if you're doing check cashing or you're doing sales of money orders that are outside of our brand, you may want to look into either registering or checking with your attorneys to see if you need to register. With that, what questions do you have? I know we've already addressed a few, but again, I think we can get a lot more out of discussing or answering your questions. So I appreciate your time, but please, what questions?
Okay, we do have a few questions. The question was asked, but the credit union was still under the impression that Vigo tracks the transactions. If there are more than one transactions done in a day, and if it exceeds the dollar amount, is that true?
Pat, if you don't mind, I maybe look to you for that one. I know that.
Are you talking about the transactions that exceed what dollar amount? The $3,000 dollar amount, the $2,000 dollar, the STAR requirement? I don't know. What's the question?
They didn't be specific, but can you address both of those amounts?
Well, I guess we track on the backside, like I've said earlier and Valdez talked about. We track all the activity on the backside. Now, if someone is structuring, we're seeing that on the backside if they're structuring between different agent locations that aren't affiliated with the credit union. If they're structuring within the credit union itself, as Valdez said, there should be checks and balances in place where you guys would see that either at the end of the week or when you look at the receipts at the end of the day, or however you do that. As far as SARs go, I mean, we file SARs just like we expect the agents to file SARs, and we don't go out and tell the agents that we're filing SARs, and we don't see the SARs that the agents are filing because they file them directly with the IRS. So hopefully that answers the question.
Now, I guess, with working with some Vigo, I do believe that at times they may see that the person's coming into your location and they have sent additional amounts, and they may want you to be the one to get additional information from them. Again, in those situations, I would follow the direction of the OV operator. It could be, unusual circumstances that they're looking at this person, and they may be looking to you now because they've seen that this is the third or fourth transaction. They want to try to get some ID. I know that at our corporate store that I've heard that before, but again, it could be something that they reach out to you for more information.
Can you talk about a supplementary SAR? FinCEN recommends filing a supplementary SAR every 90 days for ongoing suspicious activity.
Yeah, that's kind of where that I spoke to just a little bit ago, where if you file an initial SAR, that is correct. The rule does state that you can file that supplementary SAR every 90 days. I usually encourage people to do it at a minimum of once a month, but this kind of just goes back to giving the law enforcement groups and the IRS a more comprehensive picture of what's going on. So at the end of those 90 days, you might now be able to show that that person has transferred $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, and you're filing one SAR on all of the activity within those 90 days. Again, the accounts and people I work with, I always try to say, every 30 days, but the rule is every 90 days if you wanted to.
Okay, those were the questions for now. So we encourage you to submit your questions now. And actually, we have one right now. This credit union wants to know do you recommend that that they OFAC the beneficiary of a Vigo transaction?
We do run, yeah, could you repeat that question again, please?
The question typed here is, do you recommend that we OFAC the beneficiary of a Vigo transaction?
Receiver. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, right. I know that the names that come through our system do go through an OFAC screening. We have a letter to provide to our agents to show IRS or examiners that Vigo does cross-reference names against the OFAC list. If it's for a Vigo transaction, you're not required to scan or go through that. Pat, if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's right. You're right. And we have filters in place that filter the transaction prior to it being executed.
We've addressed all of the questions so far, so, we encourage anyone to go ahead and submit their questions.
Well, just while there's silence, I appreciate everyone getting on the call and going through this presentation with Valdis. We really are we're really excited about the attendance at the meeting today. It's something that Valdis does, like he said earlier, for a lot of national accounts that Western Union has, and we kind of consider this account on that level. And we really appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to attend the call.
Yeah, certainly I mirror those thoughts. I mean, I know that it takes a little bit of time to get on these calls and listen through, but hopefully, you know, we have been able to answer some of the questions. If there are additional questions even outside of this meeting, you know, I mean, of course, if there's whether they come through you and come to me, you know, please look to me as that resource. I travel a lot. At times it takes me a minute or two to get back to you, but I want to be able to answer questions and help you guys through this as we go forward as well.
This is Saul Wolf, the manager of the remittances program here at WOCU. And I just wanted to make one comment in regards to the compliance discussion we're having. We've recently had discussions with one credit union that was audited by the NCUA. And the NCUA had a number of questions about their internal processes. In this case, they were basically what the NCUA viewed as initiating a Vigo transaction from an account. So it was an account-originated transfer. Just to clarify, what Vigo offers as its service is a cash-based or a cash-initiated transfer. So if any credit unions, if that applies to you, please feel free to contact either myself or Ami, and we can go through some of the other details. Thank you.
We have a few more questions to add, Pat and Valdis. So this is also, I think, a clarification or a follow-up about the credit unions with various branches. Because since everyone has a different Vigo agent for each of the location, can the credit union access a report that combines all of the branches?
I will say that we're certainly looking into that. It's something that's on the table. I would love to give you a timeline for such a report, but I'm not able to. I can let you know that there are a few people trying to champion that to give you the ability to assign what would be called a network number, and if you had 10, 15 locations under your umbrella, that somebody at a corporate office would be able to review all of the transactions and even look at those in a combined, so they would be able to see that somebody did 10 transactions at 5 different locations. In the meantime, though, again, it is dependent on your monitoring and the steps that you have. But again, we are looking to build that report for Vigo agents, and would very much like to see that available sometime in 2010. But certainly building a tool like that is not an easy process.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that, actually we're gonna get that project going in 2010 in January. I've already talked to my superiors, and we're getting that going. So that will be something that's available hopefully next year.
Pat and Valdis, would you both be comfortable if I would share your email addresses with the credit unions?
I certainly don't mind. Again, I just remind everyone that you know, I will get back to you. At times I'm flying throughout a day. I travel throughout the U.S., but you know, yeah, feel free to you know, have my email. But again, you know, make sure that if you are a network, that you go through your compliance officer first is all I would ask. But that you know, just those two things.
Okay. Do you gentlemen have anything else to add? If not, then we can wrap up. And
no, again, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to working with the account in the future as well.
Okay, Valdis, thank you for your time. Pat, thank you for your time. And again, I will have the PowerPoint ready, and I can send that out. And then also this recorded session of the webinar will also be available to everyone. So I have everybody's email, and I will make sure to send that out, and also provide Patrick and Valdez's contact information. Otherwise, whatever compliance issues you may have, you can also address it to me. Then I can also filter it to both Pat and Valdez. So everyone, thank you for your time.
And thank you, Ami.
Thanks, Ami.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Right.
Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.